Hey everybody, I'm Scott C. Jones. I used to host Electric Playground, or EP Daily, with Victor Lucas for about 10 years. Um, I am originally from New York. Uh, Not to make this super fucking depressing, but I was there on 9/11. And New York terrified me after that. I still lived there for another 5 years. And every time I got on the subway, I thought I was gonna die. Just like if those buildings could fall down, anything could happen. And I didn't realize how much it was impacting me and how much it was compromising my life. And I met Victor Lucas at E3. And I walked up to him and I said, I love your show, but you got to get rid of your co-host. I can't stand that guy. And Victor laughed, and he never forgot me. He didn't remember my fucking name, but he never forgot me. He never forgot my energy. And he came to New York and he said, do you want to review some games with me? We went and shot some reviews, blah, blah, blah. Next thing I know, I'm moving to Vancouver, as far away from New York City as I could possibly get, 3,000 miles. And I was in Canada, and I felt safe. And I've been in Canada ever since, really since 2009, 2010. And I just became a Canadian citizen 3 months ago. They gave me this pin. If you can get Canadian citizenship, by all means, I highly recommend it. This is a great place to be. I think great things are made in this country. We're going to talk about some of those things today. I think we have 4 panelists. Also, before I go any further, Mark, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for pulling this together. I really feel for you, and I want to have a great day. I want to have some great conversations, and I want to meet some new people. And I'm trying to be optimistic, and I'm trying to put my anxiety and my fears and my neuroses aside, and I'm trying to enjoy this moment as much as possible. Thank you. I drank for a long time. I don't drink anymore. I fucking miss it. I do. It's been like 4 months now. And I'm healthy and I sleep better than ever, but I miss the numbness, man. We got to numb out. Now I'm unemployed. Victor's show went off the air in 2015, and I consult a little bit. And I make a podcast. I really have always enjoyed going to the game stores and buying a new video game whenever I had some sort of crisis in my life. Every time I had a broken heart, or I got fired from a job, or I got bad news from the doctor, I'd go right to the game store, EB Games, GameStop, whatever it's called if you're from the US, and I'd buy something and I'd feel better. I'd play it for 2 weeks and time would go by and I would get really invested in these worlds and in these experiences. And I started talking to other gamers and I started to realize I wasn't the only one who did this. Everybody does it. Every time gamers have a crisis in their lives, they go to the game store and buy something and they play it and they engage with it and they feel better. And sure, some of it's just a distraction and some of it's the 2 weeks went by while you were playing the game and so you don't feel as bad or as sad as you felt 2 weeks earlier. But some of it's the game itself. There's power there. And so that's what I try to celebrate and explore in my podcast, Heavily Pixelated. We're in season 2 now. It's me having intimate conversations with people about the miserable shit that they go through in their lives and how they got through that miserable time and the game that got them through to the other side. And these conversations are easily the best work I've ever done in my life. Not enough people are listening to my stories. I really hope you guys listen to the podcast. I don't know if you like podcasts, but man, I'm so proud of it. The story that we released on Sunday, I think, is the best that we've ever done. It's a tremendous amount of work. We just do it for free. We just do it because we love games, and we love the people who play them, and we love the people who make them. Every episode ends with a moment of gratitude where the person who went through the misery gets a chance to connect with the people who made the game. And they get to say thank you. And that really moves the game developers, and it really moves the people who got to play the game. These are incredible moments. I'm so proud of them. So I'm here today promoting my podcast, but I'm also here to moderate a panel. So I'd like to bring up the panelists. I think we have 4 panelists. We have 3? My eyesight is so bad. 4, okay. Scott Nihill. Scott, if you come on up. No, he's right here. We have, what are you, psychic? Kelli Dunlap. Kelli. We also have Ken Hall. And we also have Kristopher, please forgive me, Poulin-Thibault.
Not bad, yes.
Come on up, everybody. Welcome. I don't know where I'm supposed to go now. There's only 4 seats. Where? I don't want to stand up. I don't know how long I'm going to be here. No, it's okay.
We'll all stand too.
No, guys, sit down. Is everybody mic'd up?
Yes.
You're not mic'd up? Oh, really? That's it? What kind of BS is this?
Oh, it's friendship.
It is, but sometimes I want to talk over you and you want to talk over me, definitely. Okay. Anyway, we're not going to start with you because I'm not sharing just yet. But Ken, you're the person I know the best, right? Ken Hall, ladies and gentlemen, he's Canadian. He's one of our brethren, and he also he became a game developer when he moved to Scotland, I believe.
Well, moved to England in the first place, and then up to Scotland later. Yeah.
Is his mic
Am
on?
I on?
Is Ken's mic on? Am I the only one that's talking loud? Ken, go ahead, say something.
Test, test. I'm going to make sure I'm actually on. I am on. There we go.
You look like you're ready to do a TED Talk with that thing on.
There we go. Exactly.
5 keys to success. Go ahead, tell a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, so I went through University of Waterloo in mechanical engineering and fine arts, and everybody said, what the hell are you going to do with those 2 courses? And it actually couldn't have been a better foundation for game development. I went over to the UK with a backpack and a tent, fully intent in just sort of traveling around the country and seeing things, and I fell into a game development job. I actually went to a studio and they were advertising for a graphic design position, and I showed up and they said, well, we don't do graphic design, we do games. And they said, but do you do any 3D work? And of course I'd done a bit of AutoCAD and engineering, so they said, all right, here's a manual, thump on the desk. If you can do something in 3 days that impresses us, you can have a job. And luckily, I guess I did something well enough to...
What did you do that impressed them so much?
I made one of the turrets from the Battle of Hoth from Empire Strikes Back.
Nice. So was that real time?
No, that was way back in the 90s, and so the first place I started was data design, making Waterworld, the Sega Mega Drive game. So 8-color pixels and that sort of stuff.
And now.
And rode the industry all the way as it grew up from sort of 8 colors into now what we see like with Senwa here, full movie quality, like just astounding where it's come for sure.
Yeah. But I'm saying, what do you do now?
So sorry. So now we started a studio up about 1.5 years ago, just about an hour north of the city here, called Two Dogs Games. So we're making Destiny Sword, which is a strategy MMO. But what makes it different is that instead of managing just the stats and abilities of the characters, instead of them just being numbers on a spreadsheet, you actually have to manage their psychology and mental health throughout their combat careers. So we really have to get to understand the people, understand what motivates them and their network of relationships, and help them navigate all that as well.
Yeah, Destiny Sword, if you haven't seen it yet in action, it's well worth looking at.
I think we're demoing it this afternoon at around 1:30.
Demoing it this afternoon.
So we'll get a chance to have a little look, and some of our veteran consultants will come in.
One of the more interesting things about it is the fact that you guys try to articulate the experience of PTSD.
Yeah, so we've connected with a couple of groups who are really helping us. First of all, Take This, and Dr. B is consulting from a clinical psychology role. He's waving at us there. And also this afternoon, we'll have a couple of the veterans who are actually consulting with us from the combat side and talk us through some of their own experiences.
They're coming in?
Stories. They're coming in for the demo today, so yeah.
That's awesome. Ken, I'm really glad you're here. Let's stay on this side of the room for now, and we'll go over to Kristopher. Kristopher, you are a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. I saw a photo of you. You had a lot more hair.
Yes.
And now this is much more reasonable. Are you looking for a job? Is that what you're doing?
Not yet. So I'm still doing the PhD. Hopefully within a year I'll be done and look for a job afterwards.
Okay, Now, according to my notes here, you're a French as a second language teacher.
Yes.
And you also have made a game called Looking Back.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, so I always start when I talk about my game as a preamble. I'm not so much a game developer, but I started making this game 3 years ago, a little bit as a way. Some people use a diary, some people, use different kinds of art, and I tried my hand at game making in order to, tell my own story. So I started doing that just for fun, just to liberate myself and talk about my own struggles, talk about my own life. And then after 200, 300 hours that I put on that game, I decided, okay, maybe I should, polish it a little bit, show it to a couple people, see what they think. And now it became what it is now. It released 2 months ago, actually, so it's still pretty recent. It's on Steam. And yeah, it's just a small indie game. I made it all myself. And lots of trial and error, lots of YouTube tutorials, and I just, as a non-coder, it was a bit difficult, but I managed to finish a product, and yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
I'm really glad you're here today. I'm really glad that we have some people, I'm assuming there are many people here in the room from the academia side of life. I envy you people and your summer schedules and all the nice things you get. But I'm really glad you're here today. Thank you for coming. Let's go to that side of the room, and I want to move over to Kelli Dunlap, and I'm going to give her the microphone. Kelli, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Kelli Dunlap. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm also a game designer. I teach at American University in Washington, D.C. in their game lab, teaching master's students on game design. I'm also the chair of the International Game Developers Association's Mental Health Special Interest Group. Yeah, that's the short version.
Let's just keep that for now. That's an incredible resume of accolades. Did you fly here in an invisible jet?
No, I flew in on Air Canada, so it was pretty cool. Sat on the tarmac for a while, but yeah, flew in this morning, so happy to be here.
I sent you a question a couple days ago. I'm sorry about my jokes. I'll stop in a second. I asked you a question about sort of manifestations of mental illness or representations of mental illness in the video game realm, and you said that that's your specialty. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, that's my jam. So I have one of, if not the only paper written about mental health representation in games that doesn't use established tropes from film. So in the clip we saw earlier, he talked about how a large percentage of characters in games fall into the homicidal maniac trope. Well, that's from film studies. But in terms of research frameworks and understanding of how we actually capture what is a mental illness representation, I think I'm it. And so I've done extensive research into how we portray mental health in games, not just characters, environments, mechanics, themes, down to the names and the dialogues and the choices that you make. So that's just kind of the natural intersection of where my academic training and my clinical training just come together.
And you wrote something called a white paper, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what's that a reference to.
So I'm only one author on a fabulous white paper that was written by TIGS.CA. A white paper is like a fancy report that you put out to the world to let them know some research findings. So it doesn't have to necessarily go through publication like a journal does. So you're putting it out there that this is the research that we found so far.
Can you give me one fact from that research that you could share with us this morning?
Which one?
Give us a juicy one.
74% of game developers are white males. I don't know, is that like,
Really? 74%?
yeah, only 1/3 of game developers stay in the industry longer than 10 years because of burnout. Burnout is not just being overworked. There's an entire constellation of mental health symptoms that contribute to burnout. And it was written by the wonderful team at TIGS.CA and some fun collaborators who... And we're talking about it later, the next panel. So I don't want to, too many spoilers.
I didn't know what a white paper was. Ken, how long have you been in the industry now?
Well, it's over 20 years now, but I did have to take an 8-year hiatus after I sort of 17 years, 16, 17 years, and then take a little break, and then getting back into it the last 2 years, so yeah.
All right, let's talk about Scott. That's okay. Let's meet Scott Nihill. Am I saying that correctly?
Yep, that's right, yes.
Scott, these are the notes I have here. They're very brief. There's a web series called Whittle with 2 T's.
That's right, yeah.
And you also made a game, and I also have the words Maker Boost and Embriate here.
That's right,
Can you
yeah.
sort that out for me?
Sure, yeah. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Scott.
it's complicated. I'm a web series producer and game developer. Most recently produced a web series called What If. It's the #2 science-based web series on YouTube right now. Helped develop rehabilitation software called IREX, which is in about 900 hospitals right now, and it uses, it was the first to use AR in the rehabilitation process. My current project, Whittle, is a depression storytelling project, so sort of combining the web series producer thing with the game development thing, and that's very fresh, so we're actually launching sort of the prototype tomorrow and doing a little bit of a taste
Tomorrow?
today. Tomorrow, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So is there a way for us to look at it this week? Is that possible?
Yeah, so I am going to be showing off the game and the video after this, I believe. But you can also look at it at Whittle.ca. And so that's WITTLE.ca.
2 T's, yes.
2 T's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so
Thank you.
glad all of you are here. And so I'm going to start, before we really get into the deeper and the darker. Yesterday was my self-care day, okay? Yesterday is the day of the week when I do things. Mostly it's the day I go to all my fucking therapy, okay? So I had 2 therapy, I go to one group and another thing, and it's just like, it's exhausting, but I know that's the key to maintaining my sanity and just taking care of my needs and realizing that I have those needs or accepting that I have those needs. And this gets into a little bit of the gender stuff that Mark was talking about earlier. Like, as a man is sometimes challenging, you know, sometimes accepting that I'm deficient in some ways. I need to go to someone else and ask for help. But it was a good day. When is your self-care time, and what do you do for your own personal self-care? Who would like to go first? I could call on people like it's elementary school, but does anyone like feel inspired by what I'm saying right now?
I can start.
Okay.
So in addition to the I didn't even mention, I currently work at a nonprofit that does games for teens to help them thrive. I think that's my full-time job. So in addition to that, I also teach. And so I don't really have a self-care day because I don't have a day worth of time in addition to the job and the 3-year-old at home. And I'm currently fostering a mama dog and her 5 puppies in addition to my dog and my 2 cats and my husband. So I'm trying, you know, it's a hard world out there. So my self-care comes in like drips and drabs and snaps wherever I can get it. Games are a big part of that. There's one currently, it's called Lily's Garden, which is just this beautiful like puzzler plus decoration plus really cutesy love story, which is a lot of fun. And then I'll swap between that and the new Elder Scroll game that is on my phone as well. So flopping between, you know, murdering things and then planting pretty flowers. And food is a big part of my self-care, treating myself to stuff that, you know, that's yummy, and it just gives you that little boost that you need. And yeah, so snuggling puppies and playing games is pretty much my self-care.
Not surprisingly, the only woman on the panel is the first one to volunteer her self-care admissions. I'm just saying, like, again, we're going back to gender. Everybody, all the men are here, but you're the first one to volunteer.
I'm also a psychologist, so I think about self-care a lot. I think about my self-care, and I think about the self-care of others and what they can do to address those issues, whether they feel like they're worthy of them or not, whether they think that because I'm a guy I'm not supposed to take care of myself. You know, I say put the man in manicure and do whatever you need to do to feel good.
Ken, I know you're uncomfortable, so I'm going to you.
Sure, okay, why not? Well, I mean, first of all, I live in the countryside, about an hour north of the city, which is both a blessing and a curse. I can, you know, walk through the woods, and we have just beautiful rolling hills in our backyard, and we've got a gentleman who owns 200 acres behind us that It's like a provincial park that we can walk around. So that in itself is very refreshing, but the downside is that my internet is really intermittent, and that causes my anxiety and frustration to spike at times. But through it all, I guess I've got a couple of dogs, which, not surprisingly, are a big part of my life. We named our company 2 dogs after them. But, so I definitely, communication with animals who are, absolutely, they have no judgmentalism. They have, they don't nag me about what I haven't done yet that day. They just are there to be part of it all and happy to be, in the same room kind of thing. So that's a big part of it. And then, sports for me, I mean, like Kelly, food is one of my go-tos. I'm a real comfort eater, which, causes as many problems too, which is why the flip side is I'm really big into sports. I do a lot of activity and stuff. And when I get really frustrated, I can just go take it out on a tennis ball or something like that. And so that's really helpful for me.
I don't know if it's rude to ask this. You can tell me if it's rude. But
If you have to ask.
No, go ahead, ask. I'm so used to you now, Scott. I got divorced when I was in the UK in my first run through games, as a lot of people have. I did a few times through there, but no, I mean, otherwise it's been. And it's not so much a machismo thing. I know you're talking about gender and stuff like that. I think it's just more the time, aspect, the fact that, it's been such a hectic schedule for the last several years. There really hasn't been a lot of time to do things like that.
Christopher,
Yes.
what about you, sir? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Very similar to what we've heard so far, so I play a lot of games. I think I was born with an NES controller in my hands.
Yeah.
I've always been a big fan of those retro-style games, so I still play those a lot. And 3-4 years ago, I got my own little puppy, so a lot of zootherapy at home. 4 years ago, I had a very difficult period, and that's when I decided to get a dog. That's when I decided to start making a game, and all of those things have really helped me get better.
What kind of dog?
Cocker Spaniel.
What's her name?
Goomba. Unsurprisingly.
What's wrong with cats, people?
I have 2.
Free pass for now. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Scott, let's end with you.
I'm actually terrorized by 3 cats currently.
Okay.
But yeah, all of the above, pretty much. Long walks, food, all the kind of classic stuff. Random acts of creativity, which can be a bit of a double-edged sword because I can maybe take that a bit too far, and that can become a new project and then a new obsession. But yeah, definitely relate with everything you guys said.
Have you ever sat in a therapist's office?
Yes, yeah. It was a good experience. It was, yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
you cried too much.
No, it's fun. I think that's what this is all about. Yeah.
I think it is. I think everybody here needs to have self-care time and make sure they take care of themselves and get what they need and decide what it is they need, decide where the deficits are, and learn how to address those deficits. So I hope you're all doing that. But let's talk about video games now, and we're going to get to, especially for Ken, for sure, we're going to talk about manifestations or representations of mental illness or mental handicaps. I'm not sure what the proper terminology should be in video games themselves. I have some notes here for a couple of games, so I'll just talk for a few seconds. The first game that I really wanted to talk about was I thought I was loud enough. The first game I want to talk about is 2005's Shadow of the Colossus, which was psychologically a very bizarre experience because the goal of the game, as we all know, was to bring the Colossus down, all of the colossi, I don't know if that's the plural, but there was this nagging sadness. They just moved so slowly and they seemed so pathetic, and they were assigned their little rocky, grubby grottos that they lived in, and you'd go there and it was, it sort of felt glorious, but also you couldn't help but walk away from the game and feel a little introspective and feel a little like guilty for what you had done. You like this beautiful, glorious beast you'd brought down literally to its knees. They would fall to their knees, and you would stab them in their little vulnerable spots. And I feel like the psychology the psychological makeup of myself at the time was being projected onto the game. And it was the first time I felt like I had to do something that I was not comfortable doing. I felt empathy for these creatures that I didn't really know or understand. And I think that's very interesting, because I think the early days of video games is all about, this is the good guy and this is the bad guy. It's like films. It's like silent films. They got the top hat and the mustache that they're twisting, and they're tying the helpless damsel in distress to a railroad track. And games are much more nuanced now. And we have this experience where we are battling things that we want to understand. We don't just want to battle a black void anymore. It's not enough. And we look at what Ninja Theory was able to accomplish with Hellblade, sorry. And just the nuance that was involved in that experience. But I also thought of Metroid, Super Metroid from 1994, and I have lots of difficulties with my mother. I do. And I felt this strange mother-related victory when I got to the mother brain in Super Metroid, and it just felt like, yes, Mom, take it. And I also remembered playing Punch-Out back in 1987, and I had a lot of anger, and this was before I'd really discovered the numbness of alcohol, and I would just torture these guys. I would punch these guys until their face, this makes me sound fucking sick, but I would punch these guys until their faces would swell up, and I wouldn't knock them out, just so I could take them to the next round to see how much I could deform them. I have a lot of problems, obviously, but I feel like we don't have to necessarily sort of create these fictions or sub-fictions to explore whatever is relevant to us, to personalize the game experience. Now, because technology and the ability to write has gotten so advanced, we can express these things in the game experience itself. So I'd like to start. First of all, I'd like to ask if any of you have any games that come to mind that you feel like psychologically was an opportunity for you to express yourself in a moment that maybe was just personal to you. Scott, do you have something?
Nothing. I find that from most games it's an escape when I do play them. So I can't say I've had quite that experience where I felt. Yeah, I can't quite relate specifically with that. But it did make me think when you were talking that maybe we need a game where you play the psychologist to all the bosses in all the games that have come before today.
What was that like?
Bowser and
yeah, there was like a self-help group therapy experience in that movie, Wreck-It Ralph, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
But sorry, I deflected. But sorry I couldn't answer your question.
Okay, that's
better,
okay.
yeah.
You did your best.
Yeah.
Kelly, do you have something?
So I have two primary examples that are pretty separate. One is Halo 3. I have been a Halo fan person since, the old school days, 2001, original Xbox LAN parties in the dorms, and I bawled my eyes out at the end of Halo 3 when they make you think that Master Chief is dead. Spoilers, he's not. But yeah, I identified not so much with being a cybernetically enhanced super soldier who is fighting intergalactic zombies, but more of I went through this journey with this character, and intentionally an empty character that allows you to and put yourself into that role. And it was more about the social connection that happened because of it. So I met my husband because we played Halo together in the dorms. My Halo call symbol was sewn onto my wedding dress on the back on top of the bustle. We had Halo cake toppers, and it's something that we still do today together. My entire floor would turn out and we would have Halo LAN tournaments. The emotional connection to that game and thinking it was over was devastating. And I think that's an opportunity to really reckon with the ideas of grief and loss. Grief and loss doesn't have to be about death. You can lose your health, you can lose your job, you can lose friendships, and you grieve. Anything that can be lost can be grieved. And so I think that was a moment for me to really think about the relationships that I had built through this game, and kind of grieve maybe the sunsetting of them. But then Chief came back and it was fine. The other one would be a more recent game it's called What Remains of Edith Finch by Giant Sparrow, now Annapurna. And there's a moment, I guess content warning has to do with child death, so throwing that out there. In this game, you play through the last days of different members of the Finch family. And through these vignettes, you're acting out their last moments. And of course, you as the player, since you have the agency, you are the one who is actually having them die. Like, your actions lead to their deaths. That's how the game progresses. And there was one of the vignettes, you are like crawling through this attic because you're exploring a house as you unlock all this content. And you come into a room and it has a nursery, and there's a crib. And I remember thinking, oh God, please don't make me do this. I have a 3-year-old son, and when I was playing through this particular vignette, he was about 1.5, which is the same age as the character whose vignette you then play. The little boy's name is Gregory, and he was in the bathtub, and he loves his rubber ducks. My son loves the bathtub, he loves rubber ducks, and of course, because this is what the game is, you end up throwing a duck as the baby, which then turns on the faucet, and the child drowns. Artistically speaking, you know, it could have been much worse. They did it gently, but I actually couldn't do it. I had to hand the controller off and say, this is too much for me. I am empathically overloaded, and I shut down, and I had to walk away, and I had to have someone else do that part for me, and then I could come back to the game and do the rest of it. And so I think that kind of empathic overload, like, my son is fine, and he's never had anything like that close to happen, but I think as a parent, just the idea that it could was close enough for me to have an incredibly strong reaction to where I had to walk away. But it's a wonderful game. Like, it's a fantastic game, and I'm so glad that I was able to finish it.
Let's move on to Ken.
So actually, I think mine is probably a combination of your experiences. I mean, I mentioned before that in my first foray through the games industry, I got divorced, and at the time my son was young, about 8 years old, and it was really difficult to find safe topics of conversation, to find things that happy moments to sort of bond over, where we could kind of escape the pain and the struggles of the regular stuff that we were dealing with, and video games were our answer. I had a GameCube, which is to this day still my favorite of the platforms I've ever owned, because of the type of games that it had on it, really good, family friendly, that sort of stuff. We played lots of fun family games like Harvest Moon, and a lot of the anime games, Skies of Arcadia, that kind of thing. But the one that we really sort of bonded over was exploring the original Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. Not the original. I used to play that as a kid on my Apple IIc. But yeah, no. So and just sort of going through that process and exploring and solving things together, feeling like we had a sense of agency, having things that we could talk about. How do you think we should solve this puzzle while we're making dinner, and that sort of stuff. It really brought us together, and I think that's the most powerful thing about games in general, whether it's playing our role-playing games with your friends or board games or whatever, is the community that games are able to build and bring people together. And I think that's a really powerful aspect of them, and certainly the side of it that really helped us the most through that process.
I think the first game that I recall crying over when I was 11, 12 was Breath of Fire 2. And there was a character that I deeply associated with, and I remember it very clearly. So her name is Nina, and she goes through similar stuff that I think I was going through as a child. And that's the first time I think that I was playing a game that had a heavier story rather than something very lighthearted for like the platformers and such. So I think that was the first moment that I could really immerse myself and see myself in a video game character, and then having to see that character go through difficult stuff was a bit of a turning moment for me. And also more recently, I think, the game Life is Strange. At about halfway through the game, there is a close friend of the protagonist that sometimes commits suicide, sometimes does not, depending on the dialogue options that you choose, depending on your actions throughout the game. So there is this very strong moment where I had to pause so many times and reflect on what I should say, what I should do in order to prevent my friend from committing suicide, because the risk is real. And it was very scary but very empowering at the same time to feel like you can save your friend from dying and from all of her mental health issues. So yeah, that would be the more recent example.
Today when I was getting ready for the panel, I looked up, I wanted to bring a screenshot of Psycho Mantis from Metal Gear Solid from 1998. And I just remember that experience. It was such a weird, terrific boss fight. But this guy is not stable. Like there's something wrong with him. And I know, you've done tons of research on exactly this subject, Kelli. And so but I felt like for some reason he had gravity for me when I was trying to prepare for this panel, and I was thinking like, how have we evolved since Kojima in 1998 and that representation of a boss? I mean, all of the bosses in Metal Gear they all have problems. They all should have self-care days. They all should be in therapy, you know? But like, how have bosses changed? It's 2019. Like, the representation, not necessarily, I mean, bosses is such an antiquated term, but the representations of characters, evil characters, or the bad guys, how have they changed and how have they become maybe more nuanced or more realistic here in 2019? Does anything come to mind for anybody?
Well, I think the biggest thing, that we've seen, and Kelli referenced it, and I know, in the video presentation at the beginning, we definitely saw, some mentions of that as well, and that's that, we clearly see, in the entertainment industry, mental health being used purely on the principles of sort of major psychotic breaks, and usually, homicidal ones, and exactly, another great example. And I think that, what I'd like to see, and what I think that we're seeing nowadays, is a lot more nuance in the spectrum of how we present mental health. That it's not always debilitating, that it's not always even negatively presented. Sometimes people find that some of their characteristics give them strengths and advantages. In their daily existence, or awarenesses or empathies that they've led them to. So I think that really for me is the biggest thing, is that we're seeing it not as, and like I said before, not as seeing it as the defining factor of that character, but just a trait within that character like any others, and that it can operate on a spectrum. It can be just somebody who's dealing with a little bit of anxiety and seeing how that affects their relationships and how that brought them to where they were, both positively and negatively, and things like that.
So what you're saying right now, like, how is that reflected in Destiny's Sword?
Well, certainly in our characters, that's one of the big things we've striven to do, is to sort of look at the character as a whole, is to create a persona, to create a personality, to create a series of desires, a series of, a background history of it, life experiences, that kind of thing, that all shape the character. And, if they're dealing with a bit of anxiety, that's just one other aspect of the character that you have to get to know to be able to understand how to put that person in the best place to succeed, or how to support them through what they're going through. So, and also the fact that it really tried to normalize the fact that everybody has some aspect of mental health issues. There really is no such thing as a zero line of somebody who has nothing. We're all dealing with some aspect of this, so we can all sort of bring that awareness and empathy to the characters, to ourselves, to our friends, hopefully that transcends the game and gives us some strategies to interact with people in the real world too. Yeah.
I don't know officially how much more time we have, but I feel like I've got a couple more questions. I feel like I need like 15 more minutes. Is that okay? Okay. Dr. Dunlap, can you speak to this subject?
So I think it goes a lot back to what you mentioned earlier about how games are less now about being black and white, and there's lots of shades of gray in games. Games that have like one ultimate boss battle, like a Donkey Kong or something, that doesn't really happen very much, or not as much anymore. It's still really problematic. I think about Far Cry 3, which is not that old of a game, and you see Vas Montenegro just talking about, why I'm crazy. He basically does the Joker thing, and you want to know how I got these scars type of deal, and that's his entire motivation. I mean, and everything from Kefka to Voss, like that's who they are. Because there are more games being made, more kinds of people making games, and more types of games being made, we're seeing different stories being told. And so you do get stuff like the Depression Quest by Zoe Quinn, where the depression is the enemy, it is the boss that you're fighting, but it's not even a fight. It's like, how do I manage this in my day-to-day? You see that, that Dragon Cancer. Cancer is the boss, and you never see it, and you can't fight it, and you can't win. And so sometimes, I think to me, some of the most powerful games are ones where you can't win. And I think it really speaks to what kind of games you want to play. Like if you want to be the hero, then there is going to be a boss that you can defeat. And if they're crazy, then that's what they are. I personally find that a little bit lazy. Like, let's do some character development here. And it's not that a villain can't have a mental illness, and it's not that a villain has to be like totally evil. It's that characters that are engaging tend to be actual like representations. They tend to be deep. They tend to have personalities. They tend to have layers to them that, if you took away one, there'd still be something there. Like with Kefka, if you took away his mental illness, his psychopathy, there would be nothing left. And so having characters that are deeply flawed, I think, makes some of the best heroes and some of the best villains. And we're definitely getting more of that now than we have in the past. But the medium's maturing, and that's I'm glad to see it happening.
I really love what you're saying about boss fights that you can't win. I don't know why more video games don't do that. I love when I realize, like, I'm just not strong enough to win this fight. It doesn't happen enough. And when it does, I'm always exhilarated. I'm like, oh, that's why I can't win this fight. I have to go out and travel more and gather more resources and then come back.
So Zelda Breath of the Wild is probably a fave for you.
Right. Thank you. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think the range of games, the range of different types of games, sort of complicates the conversation because, unlike film, I guess most of the games that I play are strategy based, so more of like a Civilization, kind of like SimCity sort of. So in that kind of, there really isn't much of a narrative component to it. So if you decide to destroy your city, then maybe you take on some of those psychopathic kind of traits, but it's not something that's necessarily projected on the game. So I think that where the conversation seems to really focus more on is games where there's a narrative element at the core of it, and that is kind of a smaller subset of games, but maybe becoming more of a feature of games. But yeah, and it definitely does. Like when I talk to people that don't play games, maybe are more into watching movies or that sort of thing, I think that's something that people have come to expect from cinema, and that for a much longer period of time where we expect these grand performances, and that if the characters don't feel real, if the story doesn't feel like it's something that is based on some kind of truth, then people are going to trash the film. And I think we're probably for better, we're getting to a point with games where that same level of critique is now it's how games are being critiqued. I think that's a good thing, because if you're going to feature a character that's hollow and one-dimensional, then your game may not do very well. I think that's a good thing.
If I can maybe just add on to
Go
that
ahead.
and just say that I think we're in a really unique position in the games industry because, we have that sense of agency that the other media don't. With a film, with a book, the only decision you have is whether to keep reading, the next page. Whereas in our industry, we actually have a chance to interact and change the story, chart the story. So I think that's really exciting. It creates a lot of opportunity for us as developers to really explore new areas, for sure.
I think also our appetite when we watch a Marvel movie, like we need to know what the motivating factor is for the bad guy. We need that. I don't think we always needed that. Again, back to the top hat and the twirling mustache, like I think it was just the bad guy, but now we need to know, what happened? How did this guy become the bad guy? And so I think there's an appetite for more. Even if you think of James Bond, again, it's for some reason I'm thinking of movies today. James Bond villains, I feel like we need to know how this villain, especially now, the current movies, how this person became so bad. What happened to them to make them this way? We need that explanation as an audience, and I don't think audiences always needed it, but it's something we definitely need now. Kristopher, last thoughts on this?
I do enjoy that more and more games are less black and white. Sometimes you don't even know what you're fighting, and part of the game is actually discovering what you're trying to fight. I'm thinking, for example, the Silent Hill games, where you come to embody a character that you don't know, and you don't know why they're there or what they're trying to accomplish. You just try to survive, and as you do so, as you explore, you discover more about the character. And it's not always explicit what they suffer from, and if this character is depressed, if this character has PTSD, but with certain events that happen, and you come to really empathize with the character without knowing what they're really fighting. So I think this is interesting. Games are more and more metaphorical and figurative. They don't need to be explicit on having one boss fight that you have to reach. Especially in terms of mental health, I think it's important to not always put things into neat boxes, but just look at the character, and they're a character that may or may not suffer from a mental health issue, and that's who you are, and that's who you have to embody.
Thank you all for those responses. I really appreciate it. This is the last bit, because I know we don't have a ton of time. I would sit here talking to you people all day. But I want to talk about money, and I want to talk about marketing, and I want to talk about mental health or the stigma of mental health, and even having a conference like this and giving it this name, the sort of the ways in which people are going to react to that, and the negative ways they're going to react to that, and maybe they're going to feel like, oh, I should go to this, it's probably the right thing to do, or I should make a donation to this, it's probably the right thing to do, but I don't really want to, I wish that wasn't going. Like, I worry about that. Nobody's listening to my podcast. I love my podcast. It's amazing.
So
I
do
work
I.
so hard
You're
on
great.
it. No, I know, thanks, Ken. But I feel like part of it is there's like the mental health stigma is a turnoff for people. It's not a guilty pleasure. It's not true crime. It's not like we're going to find out the bad guy here. It's complicated, and it's messy, and it's ugly at times, and it's beautiful. But I think we're all in search of that beauty that's hard to get to, and I think sometimes in the entertainments that we're creating, especially Ken with Destiny Sword and the PTSD subtext, it's not a subtext, like that's a big part of the game now.
Sure.
Like I wonder what that's going to be like for people. Oh, we should cover this game, it's got PTSD in it, but it's also complicated, and it's a big, heavy subject. But what can we do to make these things, these experiences, I guess, it's a general question, but what can we do to sort of make them more appetizing or less stigmatized for the editors and the public at large and the people who play games and the people who love this medium? And how can, again, like going back to Mark's question from earlier, how can we get, more men to come here and not feel like I can't go and be represented as a broken person or whatever? How do we get rid of some of that negative stigma? I guess stigma inherently is negative. How do we get rid of it? How do we remove that from the equation or remove that from the experience? And I've talked way too long trying to explain this, so you guys go.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're doing it right now, just by having this conversation with us, and hopefully us having a conversation about it, and the people will be having a conversation about it after us. And I think the more people talk about these sort of things honestly, and share it, with the world, I think that definitely helps.
Yeah. I feel like I need to give you a hug because your podcast is amazing and you're doing amazing work. But Scott's right. That's exactly what is breaking down those walls, and it's a very tough road for the first people to tread, because there is a stigma, there is a concern. How can listening to that be fun, or how can playing that be fun, or how can that be a positive experience, or is it too close to home? And that sort of thing. So I definitely think that you know, there are going to be some trailblazers, and you're certainly one of them. And that's what it takes. It takes people. We listened to the professor talk about, you know, Prince Harry and how big or actually, sorry, it was Mark that talked about that. You know, Prince Harry and how big an impact that some of these role models have, coming out and saying, you know, look, we struggle with this, but it's okay. We're still role models, we're still celebrities, we're still strong, we're still good at what we do or whatever, that it's just an aspect of our lives. And I really feel that's what it's about. The more of us that do this, the more of us that sort of create things that examine all these different aspects, the more normalized talking about it becomes, and the easier it becomes to have that conversation.
So maybe we're first generation.
Well, at least early, there's certainly, I like to think there are lots of shoulders that we're standing on that we sort of, you know, who have really broken the back of it. But yeah, no, it's starting to gain momentum now, I think, and I feel positive about the direction that the conversation is going in, that people are becoming aware and becoming open to, you know, admitting and talking about it and that sort of thing.
So I think one of the most beautiful things about video games is that they are a reflection of culture, but they can also change culture. And so as we are designers, if we can start designing games to openly and honestly address issues related to mental illness, I think that is a powerful way to destigmatize, considering the popularity of video games, considering the amount of people, all gender, all races that play. And it's a way to get that information to people who may not otherwise seek it out. Hellblade is a fantastic example. It's not a game about mental illness. Like, that's your educational games for change, which are fine and they're wonderful, but they're not going to, I mean, not at this point ready to change the world, because they're small and they're not really going to get to they're going to preach to the converted, rather. A game like Senua, or about Hellblade, it has broader appeal because they're not hitting you over the head with, this is mental illness, you should be nice about it. I would love to see games address issues related to mental health stigma in a more powerful way, whether that's, you know, your character takes their meds every day. That's it. No impact on gameplay. There's no sanity meter. There's no dipstick saying you're sane. It's just, you take your meds every day, because it's a normal thing that over half the population does every single day for mental health reasons. I'd love to see more games exploring where mental health is just a component of the character. It's not who they are, but it is something that influences how they see the world. I think that could have a really powerful effect. Think about, you know, again, the depression quest is a great example. Elude, which Doris is there in the back, so I got to shout out Elude, as those kinds of experiences for connection with other human beings, not even to the game, but to other human beings. This is what it's like. And I would be so relieved if horror games would just never, ever, ever use insane asylums ever again. That would be, that's insane asylums. Yeah, have you ever had your character wake up at a psychiatric hospital and had something good happen? No, you haven't, because it's yeah, it's cultural shorthand for be afraid. And so I think there's lots of ways that as a game design community we can confront these things. And they're not, you know, like games for change. This is a mental health game. It's a game that happens to have a mental health component. And I think that there can be a seismic shift if we're able to do that.
Yeah. And just to perhaps add an optimistic note, I think there is more and more variety in how mental health is being depicted. The same way, so if we keep going, I think it's just gonna be better and better. And I think it was the same with gender. 20 years ago, there were very few female protagonists, and nowadays there are more and more, where it's not about a female protagonist, but a protagonist that happens to be female. And sure, it affects the way perhaps some of the events happen, her outlook on the world, but this is not the defining traits of the protagonist. And I think it's the same thing with sexualities, with mental health. You know, it's just about having a diversity of characters, and characters that have a diversity of traits within themselves. And I think we're going in that direction more and more.
I mean, mostly I'm talking about shaving sort of the clinical edge off of what we are trying to do, or the kinds of products that we're building and the kinds of things we're talking about, because right now we're leading with that clinical edge, and I wonder if it doesn't always help us. It helps us in this room, but there are lots of people who aren't here today because of that clinical edge. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's just the stigma about talking about it that you know, we've been discussing, and I do think that is gradually breaking down. And I think that the only way to break it down is to continue talking about it.
That's all the time we have. No, I thought it was a good point. It was. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to meet all of you. We're all going to be around today. If you have questions for these people, they're going to be here. So thanks again. And again, thanks to Mark and Eve and this Dr. B. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's it. I don't know what to do, so.